Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today's show is a continuation of the lecture featured on last week's show. I'll give a quick summary just in case you missed it. I reported on the very high occurrence of UFO sightings in northeast Lincolnshire, which is a sparsely populated coastal region of the UK. One of the objects witnessed in broad daylight in September 2011 was reported as being the size of 10 double-decker buses, egg-shaped, electrically charged and accelerated at impossible speed. Within a few weeks of this object being sighted, a local farm suffered an alleged theft of 1,500 sheep from a single field in a single night. This was the UK's biggest ever sheep rustling incident. In 2015, 2 further farms in Lincolnshire suffered similar, preposterously large numbers of sheep going missing in a single night. Currently, the 3 cases are all unsolved. That's an alleged total of 2,400 sheep gone missing without a trace. Now let's plot some of this evidence on a chart of a map. We've got Mablethorpe here on the east coast, multiple sightings there. We've got the wind turbine incident at North Somercourts. We've got multiple sightings at Louth. We've got our large egg-shaped object here that the gentleman saw in broad daylight. And we've got the triangle sightings down here. Now I'm going to show you where these 1,500 sheep disappeared from on the map. So it's right there. This is where the field is, where the 1,500 sheep disappeared. So you can see why I'm getting all excited about this. Now this is the article on the BBC website, and there's an actual interview. You can listen to it if you want. It's in my film, with the detective who's investigating this. And he says things like, well, they must have had at least 2 wagons. They've obviously very organised. They must have had dogs. Don't buy meat from dodgy shops and this kind of thing. So he's absolutely buying the fact that it's this massive rustling incident. 1,500 have gone overnight in big transporter trucks. So I went to investigate the case. This is the village where it supposedly happened, a place called Donington, very sparsely populated. Going into the local shop was like a scene from the League of Gentlemen. I said to the woman, do you know anything about these missing sheep? And she didn't actually say anything. She just sort of walked backwards back into the shop like this. All right. I got a bit more luck in the pub though. The best intelligence gathering establishments in the world, public houses. Right, so anyway, I managed to find the field. So here's Donington, the village, and now this is the field here. It's a very big field. Here's some photographs that I took of it. Nothing spectacular. This is looking from the other side. It had an electric fence on one side, and a road on the other side, and fields on the other 2 sides. So I'll show you an aerial view. So we've got the electric fence going right the way along here, a country road going along here where feasibly a lorry could have come in. These green here are gates. There's a gate there, there's a gate there. But this is just fields here. There's no roads here. So the only feasible point where sheep could have been taken is a gate here. All right. Now the only house anywhere near the field was a house about 80 yards away, where a couple were asleep in their bed, but they had a very alert dog, and you can actually hear it barking in the background. So I went to speak to that couple to find out if they'd actually heard anything. This is Patrick and Gabriella, and just standing in front of their house here. And if I just come out the house, the field starts just on that corner, because there's a fence going across from there. Right. So as you've gone around that corner to the left is where, at that point. Yes. Okay. Right. Now, on that particular night when these sheep disappeared, did you hear anything?
No, we didn't hear a thing, did we? No.
And I can hear the dog barking there now.
Yes. So. I'm a fairly heavy sleeper. My wife can be light sleeping, but neither of us heard anything.
Okay.
My dog would have heard something, I would have thought, if they'd been in the proximity of the house.
Now there are rumours that the shepherd and his wife were implicated, and that they were arrested, perhaps for taking money from the people who turned up with these wagons.
Yes, that's what we'd heard.
That's what you'd heard.
He took a backhander because he was involved.
Now this is rumour, isn't it? You were telling me that you've not heard this, because I haven't seen that in the newspapers.
No.
You said you think you might be inside now.
Well, that's what I'd heard, but you know what people are like, he's locked up now and this sort of thing. Yeah. All I can assume was it was done in the early hours of the morning, in the dark, and how they did it without being seen or heard.
Because that's the other question. They would have had to have sheepdogs, 1,500 sheep, rounding them up. They just give the sheepdogs night vision goggles, perhaps.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether they use any dogs or what.
Well, I would have thought they'd have to.
Well, I would have thought so.
Unless it was just a gang of men running around the field. But I mean, the sheep were definitely in there about sort of 5 or 6 o'clock the night before, because I remember driving home and seeing them
right, so
there.
you're a witness to them being there at 6 o'clock.
They were there about tea time the night before.
Great.
Yes, and then not the next morning.
So, I mean, you're talking seeing a lot of sheep the night before.
Yes.
Because it's a huge amount of sheep. And then
it's a very big field.
So you're a first-hand witness to that following day, there was no sheep in the field.
That's right. Yeah.
So you were actually visited by Special Branch?
Yeah, Special Branch came to ask us if we'd heard anything. Because, you know, they reckoned there would have been quite a bit of noise. They reckoned they'd need at least 2 wagons, and the noise of the sheep. I mean, you know, they're not quiet, are they?
No, they make a lot of noise.
And we had to say that we hadn't heard a thing.
All right, so obviously I've got to find out the guy who's been arrested, right? There was a shepherd, 60-odd-year-old, and his son, who was also a shepherd, and his wife. So 3 of them were arrested, and they were under suspicion for about 3 or 4 months. So, but I didn't know his name, and all I had was the fact that he lived in Nettleton. So I went to Nettleton, to another intelligence gathering establishment, where there was only one guy in the bar, and I said, oh, you know, do you know about these sheep then? He says, oh yeah, that'll be Arthur, he lives just over there. So I was able to find out where he lived, so I went and knocked on his door, and he said he'd been completely cleared, absolutely cleared, no suspicions, all charges dropped. All right. So for all the BBC reported the fact that 3 people had been arrested, they didn't report the fact that no one had been charged and nothing had come of it. Now, just to point out about physical evidence left if you're going to load 1,500 sheep, you can't just pull up with a massive transporter wagon, lower the track, and expect them to run on to the thing, even with dogs. They'll do everything that they can not to go on in the thing. They'll run under the truck. They'll run into the bushes. They'll run. What you have to do is you have to erect a pen in the field first, with one end of it open. You herd them all into a pen, so you've got them all in one place. You then have to build like a walkway where you can open one of these out, a narrow walkway up onto the truck. Now they're milling around for quite a period when you're doing that for 1,500. Okay, you could do them in batches, but you're still going to have evidence of a pen, and you're going to have evidence of shit on the ground and wool on the ground and trampled down grass, so you're going to be able to see that it's been done. All right? Now, I sort of pestered the detective, and I managed to get this information out of him. This is an edited down interview with him on the phone. Well, it's not an interview, it's a telephone call that I've recorded, and listen to what he says in these comments. And by the way, if you go and look at his interview with the BBC, he's saying, oh yeah, they must have had these trucks and they must have had dogs and all of this. Just listen to these comments.
Hello, Nick Jones.
Hello, Nick. This is Richard Hall. I spoke to you a few weeks ago about the missing sheep case at near Donington.
Oh yes.
I've had a look at the lock on the gate, and it's not a new lock. Do you know if the gate was open or closed when the first person appeared on the? Sorry.
It was closed.
It was closed. And was there a lock on the gate?
Yeah. I seem to remember it was padlocked as well.
It was padlocked as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So everything in that.
As it is today, still in situ. As far as I'm aware, everything that was gated and locked was still intact.
Right, okay. And again, any evidence of any vehicles there?
No, nothing at all.
Okay. So he said completely opposite to me than what he's actually gone on the radio and said. Every gate was gated and locked, no evidence of any vehicles, nothing. All right, because he doesn't want to report something which is unexplained to him. At this point in time, it seemed as though there were no suspects, no evidence of an insurance job, and that's because the animal owner or the landowner is a multi-millionaire, and he'd put cameras around the field after the theft, right? So there was no evidence suggesting that he'd done it for insurance purposes. There's no physical evidence there, as you heard from the detective. There's no witnesses, and the field was padlocked and all the entrances were undisturbed. And we've had this UFO witnessed in the same month, this huge egg-shaped electrically charged object. So what I've said in the film is, does the evidence point to that, or does it point to that? Now, I'm not saying it is this, because I've since had further evidence. Now I'm just going to read these UFO sightings. So one of them took place just, I don't know, about 15 miles north of what, this is where the 1,500 sheep went missing. So this is near Grimsby, and the second one a little bit further near the Humber. I'm just going to read these sighting reports out. Hi Richard, just watched the Lincolnshire Triangle programme. I'm from Grimsby, and the same month, September 2011, me and my brother saw a similar egg-shaped craft travelling over the village of Laceby/Irby upon Humber at roughly 8 AM to 8:45 AM. At first, I thought it was a blimp/airship for advertising at the Mercedes garage on the A46, but it was moving towards Binbrook quite slowly and over the Lincolnshire wolds. We observed it for about a minute, give or take 10 to 20 seconds, as we walked over Bradley Pitches from the Bradley Park estate. It was very large and was roughly a mile away. If it was a blimp/airship, it would have been stationary over the garage, and I'd have seen it in the previous days. There was no sound or visible lights on it. Now, I couldn't find any evidence of there being blimps or airships in Lincolnshire at that time. Okay, now here's another statement. This is a bit further north on the Humber. I was looking east, and this light egg shape moving so fast cleared the sky in 2 seconds or less. The size I can surmise roughly as, think of the brightest star multiplied by 20 to 30 times, and that's about the size. Well, it made me shout, F me, excuse my French, but that's what I said at the time, attracting attention of my mate. But by the time he turned round, it had gone. He said it might be a meteor, but no way, this was too large, and it went in a straight line and was low. Okay, now I've been investigating these 2 further cases which happened this summer, 300 and 600 in 2 fields nearby, and I've made a few contacts there in the farming industry. Now this guy has got I can't name him because it was given to me in confidence, but it's all recorded, and he's got quite a responsible role in the farming industry. He's not someone who's going to make things up. And what he said to me was that the shepherd had been taking 40 to 50 in a trailer every so often from the farm and selling them at an abattoir. I said to him, well, what about the ear tags? Because they're all electronically tagged. He can't just take someone else's sheep and sell them. He says, he laughed. This is someone who's in the farming industry and deals with buying and selling animals. He said abattoirs don't scan ear tags. He said they'll take sheep off anyone. So for all it is regulated, it's not policed, right? I said, okay. I said, well, how sure are you of this source then? He says, oh, absolutely. But I can't give you his name because he's someone who actually works on that estate. He says, but take it from me, that's what was happening. Now, that would explain the evidence. The fact that what he said is this guy is so wealthy, 1,500 sheep was absolutely nothing to him, and his eye wasn't on the ball, this extremely wealthy landowner, and the shepherd just one day thought, oh, well, I'll just sell a few, and then he sold a few more, and then at some point it was noticed, right? So he then had to concoct a story and just said, oh, well, they've all been taken. But the point being that the detective has just bought the story, hook, line and sinker, and gone on BBC Radio and reported the whole thing. He hasn't reported the evidence correctly. There's no evidence of any trucks, the gate was still locked, there's no evidence of any drop-ins in the field, which is what he should have done. Now, I don't rule out a UFO connection, right? But I think based on what this guy tells me, I'm more inclined to accept the more mundane explanation. However, I do think there is an undisclosed aerial vehicle flying around in that region. Okay, now let's look at these other 2 cases that I've looked into this summer. The first one is about 15-20 miles north of the 1,500, and this is 600 went missing. This is on the 2nd of June this year. So this is the story in Mail Online. It said, where did my sheep go? Farmers despair as rustlers with sheepdog steal entire flock, 600 in the dead of night. Now this is a slightly more populated area. There's a small village here. The field they were taken from is here, at this entrance here, marked A. This is the farmer. Now just look at that photograph. This is taken the day after they were taken from the field they were taken. Where's the evidence of rustling? Where's the evidence that a pen's being built? Where's the shit on the ground? Okay, I would have thought, there's another photograph from the same article, clean as a whistle. and another one. I would expect it to look more something akin to that, right? So I've done my own artist's impression of what I think it should look like. So that raises suspicion in my eye straight away. So the article went on to say, police believe the raiders even brought their own sheepdog so they could round up the sheep quietly and load them onto a massive multi-tiered transporter at the remote rural location. Not a single witness of a multi-tiered transporter. They're assuming it. There were no witnesses. It was thought the flock was targeted by organised crime. Why was it thought that? In what is believed to be one of Britain's biggest sheep rustling operations. Mr. Steeper and his wife Natalie now may be forced to give up as a result of the theft. All the animals were microchipped, so without proper paperwork, the rustlers could sell them only to backstreet abattoirs. That's bollocks. Mr. Steeper said yesterday, I drove past on Wednesday morning and there were no sheep in the field and the gate was wide open. Then I realised the chain and padlock had been cut, but I could not believe they had taken the blooming lot. They must have been stolen to order. PC Tracy Teal of Humberside Police said, this is the biggest livestock case I have ever come across. The family have been victims of organised crime. They are very upset. They have been targeted in this way. It is a nice little village and everyone is shocked. Alright, so when I saw that, I think, not sure I buy all of that. So I put a message out on Facebook to ask if there was anyone lived nearby to go and take photographs. And this chap, John Preston, obliged. So he went there. Okay, it was 10 days later by the time he got there to take photographs, and it had rained since. So you can see, since he took the photographs 10 days later, you've got these tyre tracks going in, tractor tracks, which clearly been made after this photograph. But we did do a little report. I went up there to meet him just to get a witness account of what he saw. There's regular traffic along this road even at night. It's not a quiet road. If you continue a few miles ahead of me there, you end up at Humberside Airport. This is the only point that a truck could have feasibly got in. So it splits off into two separate fields. The one on the left is not gated, so we don't think the sheep were taken from that field. We come round to the right here, and this is the gate that Jason Steeper was pictured at.
Well, the first thing we looked at, once we'd identified the field from the pictures in the Telegraph, we had a walk along the hedgerow, surmising that maybe some lorries had parked up on the roadside, and we then looked for any evidence of any sheep movement. There was no droppings anywhere. There was no evidence of any wool on either of the bushes or on the floor at all. So we then surmised that possibly the trucks came through this way into the field through this area here. The first thing what struck me though was this very sharp dog leg, and we've also got a quite deep ditch just there. Whether a large vehicle could get through there, I don't know. There was no sign of any tyre tracks going into the field, only these old ones. The main ones you could see was near the gate. There was obviously tractor tyres. The only tracks we did notice from the gate was, they looked like 4x4 tracks going into the gate and following this side of the field all the way as far as we could see. They didn't look deep, they didn't look particularly wide apart. It suggested to us that it was a 4x4 type of vehicle what had made those tracks. And also through the gate there was no evidence again of any sheep movement through the gate or in that area at all, no droppings or wool around there at all. And we noticed when we was at the gate looking over the field, there's a small manor house just right at the very back of the field where you can see the top story windows looking over the field.
Right, so it seems there's no physical evidence of rustling there. Now one thing I've learned, when you ring the police up, you first find out who the investigating officer is, but they will always refuse to give you any information because that's their policy. But what I've noticed is if you give them information, especially if they're not aware of it, they will give you information. So try and find something that they're not aware of first before you ask them the pertinent question. So I've chopped this interview down a bit just to give you a few of the pertinent points of the phone call.
Hello, Trace Teal, Ashford Police Station.
Hello there, my name's Richard Hall. I'm just ringing in connection with the stolen sheep at Melton Ross on the 2nd of June.
All right, yeah, I got a message earlier on to contact you, Richard.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are you aware of previous very large rustling incidents, particularly one in September 2011, a place called Donington, about 12 miles south of Melton Ross?
No, I'm not.
Right. Okay. There was 1,500 went missing. I know you were quoted in the press as saying that it's one of the biggest livestock cases you've ever seen.
Yes.
The one at Donington, there were 1,500 went missing on one night. The person who investigated it was Detective Constable Nick Jones, and I think he was at Skegness police station.
So it was in the Lincolnshire police area, was it?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. See, it said in the media that there was a dog. Now, I'm not aware of any evidence that a dog was used, other than the fact that it's assumed.
Yeah.
I mean, would that be the case, that it was assumed that a dog was used rather than they know a dog was used? Can you give me that?
Yeah, well, it is an assumption because of obviously the large numbers that would have been rounded up.
Right.
You know, and if somebody, I don't know, for example, was using other means, shouting, whistling, etc., and making a noise, then that would obviously have attracted interest in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's certain things you have to sort of think, well, if somebody's doing that, how are they going to get them into transportation vehicles? And some sort of sheepdog would be the ideal tool to do that.
Right.
So, because we can't say, oh well, a sheepdog was seen in the area and stuff like that.
Right.
That's not the case.
That's not the case. Yeah. So it's just made that up about the sheepdog. It's bullshit. There's no evidence of a sheepdog. So can we believe that there's evidence of a broken lock? So I went to the farmer's house. I knocked on his door. A young girl answered the door, and she says, "Oh no, he's away on holiday in Florida." I thought, has he got the compensation yet? Now, I tried to call him again and again and again. He's someone who doesn't answer his phone. All right? So there we go. No physical evidence that I've managed to establish of sheep rustling in that case. Now let's have a look at the other case down here, a place near Newark. I think it's about 20 miles southwest of the original 1500 here. Down here, a place near Newark. I think it's about 20 miles southwest of the original 1500 here. Here it is reported in the Lincolnshire Echo. Around 300 sheep and 120 cattle have been taken in a large-scale theft from a farm in Lincolnshire. Police are looking for witnesses and information about the incident in Brant Broughton. Officers believe offenders forced entry to a field near Beckingham Range and stole the animals between Sunday, July the 26th and Monday, July the 27th. That's this summer, this year. Now, 120 cattle, it is vastly more difficult to rustle cattle than it is sheep. The pen that you've got to erect in the field is like this, and to put 120 in, you're talking a big area. And again, much heavier equipment to get it onto the truck. Now, in the article, it said that these animals were taken from Brant Broughton. That's untrue. This is Brant Broughton here. It said a field near Beckingham Range. This is actually a military training camp. It's a firing range, outlined in red here, right? The animals were actually taken from the range. They were grazing on the range, the sheep and the cows, right? They weren't taken from Brant Broughton, as it says in the media article and in the police press release. This is 2 miles away. So there's some funny business going on with that report. They're trying to play down the fact that it's from military land, in my opinion. This is the Beckingham Ranges here. As I said, it's firing ranges. There's a military camp here, and these are what the military use for firing ranges and exercises. But when they're not using it, they have sheep grazing on there. Now this, where I've marked here, this is the entrance point here. You just pull off the motorway and there's a gate there, and that's allegedly where 120 cattle and 300 sheep were taken from in the dead of night, supposedly. Now, here's the police press release, which all of the newspapers cut and pasted and put in their newspapers. And just to reiterate, it says, were taken from a farm in Brant Broughton. Untrue. Right, and it says near to Beckingham Range. They were on the Beckingham Range. See, I would have thought that would have been the central selling point of that story. The newspapers saying 300 sheep and 120 cattle taken from under the MOD's nose. That should have been the important part of that article, but they were playing it down clearly. This is the gate where they were allegedly taken from. Ministry of Defence property, trespassers may be prosecuted. Do not touch any military debris, it may explode and kill you. Would you steal sheep from that land? Right? Now I managed to get there 18 days later. Okay, it's not very soon after, but you can see there's no evidence of rustling on the ground at that point in time. Now this is the camp here, which has oversight of that field. A military camp. This is the gate of the military camp. Defence Infrastructure Organisation, Beckenham Camp. Now, I started going around the local farms and started speaking to people, and I spoke to one farmer, and he straight away, I said, look, I'm looking into these sheep, and immediately he says, if I were interviewed, I would say it was all a fraud. And then he went on to cast huge aspersions against the farmer who was grazing his sheep on that land. He said that the sheep owner is well in with the commandant of the camp, Major John Aspinall. I then spoke to some other people, and I spoke to a guy who I would describe as a person with a highly responsible role in the farming community. And this is just some extracts of what he told me in the phone call. He says, this job at Beckenham, strictly off the record, is a complete load of shit. There was 37 cattle on that range. Nobody has seen 120. I live very close to the range. To gather 120 cattle, building the pens that can stand 120 cattle milling about in it, and then to load them and then pack all the pens away, making sure there was no marks, and wash all the shit off the grass is completely impossible. He was buying lambs out the fat and snipping the tags off the ears and putting in his own tags, which is illegal, by the way. But he was warned about this. It's amazing how the guy has got hold of it all, and I would think it's a complete den of conspiracy and underhandedness, because he came there with nothing and it doesn't stack up to me. And I spoke to another farmer who essentially said the same thing about the farmer who grazes his sheep on that land. So I decided to ring Major John Aspinall, who's allegedly well in with the farmer, the commandant of this base. He's in charge of the land. Now, I had a couple of phone calls with him. In those phone calls, he said that photographs were not taken, so that we can't see evidence of what was on the ground at the time. He said that the lock was smashed off, and he has that in his possession. I said to him, well, was there 300 sheep then? He says, oh no, I can't confirm that. He says, I couldn't tell you how many sheep there were. And then I said to him, well, it said on the press release there was 120 cattle. He says, oh no, 20 cattle. Definitely 20 cattle, not 120. All right, and he did say that there was shit on the ground, but it had all been cleaned up. All right, so let's look at this press release by the police. It's incorrect. 20 cattle, not 120 cattle. We think that the 300 claim is also incorrect. It didn't take place at a place called Brant Broughton. It didn't take place at a place near Beckenham Range. It took place at a place on Beckenham Range. So nearly everything in that press release is incorrect. And so I rang the police to tell them that. The rustling...
In relation to the sheep and the cattle that was stolen,
yeah.
There were no photos taken at the time.
Right, okay.
It was just, obviously, the incident was reported and inquiries were ongoing, but there was no photographs taken at the time.
Are you PC Lawson?
I am, yeah.
All right, okay. So did you not go to the scene then?
I did go to the scene, yes.
All right, okay. So it's just the press release from the police says 120 cattle.
That's right. That's what was that was information given to me, yeah, at the time.
Right. Okay. Well, I've been given information by, well, the commandant of the base,
right,
who's responsible for the land there.
Right.
There was only 20 cattle.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the numbers that were given to me were clear numbers given to me at the time.
Right.
Obviously, you know. I can't obviously go into it too much about, you know, but the numbers that were put out in the press release were the numbers that were quoted to me at the time of reporting the incident.
Right,
and
okay.
I have had some information from sources to suggest that the numbers might not be correct.
So it looks like fraud, agree? The clear numbers given to me at the time, but I've had information from other sources, so looks like an insurance job to me. So what can we say about these three cases? I suspect all of them, I don't know they are, but I suspect they're all inside jobs. They're not mass rustling incidents where you've got 4 and 5 wagons turning up in the middle of the night, highly sophisticated operations. They're dodgy farmers. That, in my opinion. But why can't we ascertain this when we look at our mainstream media? Yeah? We just get fed shit, as I've said at the beginning, right? Because they never provide any evidence of anything. And you've got to go and investigate these cases. It took me a long time to get to the bottom of this. But if you're just going to work every day and looking at the newspaper, what chance have you got to find out the truth when we've got such woeful police and woeful media reporting? This is Alison Pratt from the National Farmers Union. Alison Pratt, a spokesman from the National Farmers Union, said, "These type of thefts obviously happen at night where fields are isolated, so there are no witnesses around. The culprits behind this must have been very organised and know how to handle sheep and dogs. So it could suggest that they have been in the business. They will have got to know the routine of the shepherd. It was a well set up job with specialist transport." Just have a listen to this for your own entertainment.
Hello, Alison Pratt speaking.
Hello Alison, my name's Richard Hall. I'm doing some research into the missing sheep in Lincolnshire.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Well, I've looked
A few
into...
lots gone recently.
Yes, I've looked into the ones at Beckingham Range.
Oh, yes.
Have you actually been to that site?
No, I'm just the region's communications advisor. I don't deal
Right,
with
so-
thefts or anything like that. All I do is talk about it.
Right, okay. So can I ask where you got your information from for that particular one?
I think the Sleaford paper rang me on that one.
Say again?
The Sleaford Target, I think it was. They
Right.
rang me and said, did I have a comment on it?
Did you have a comment on it? Okay.
Yes, and all I said was, it's an exceptionally large amount of sheep, and they must have been very organised.
Right, okay. Now, I'm very doubtful that there's been any theft at all from that particular field. Firstly, because it's military-controlled land where the sheep were taken from, and if you drive around that area, every 100 yards or so, there's a big sign saying, if you touch anything on this land, it may well explode and kill you. Now, I've also spoken to the person who owns the sheep on that military land, and he denied owning the sheep, even though he did own the sheep. And I've also been told by another farmer that he's been changing ear tags at Newark auctions. Now, I suspect it's a fraud. The 120 cattle. I spoke to another farmer, and he laughed when I said 120 had been taken from that particular land. Now,
Sorry, Richard, can I just ask what your interest is in it, and why you're calling? And are you something to do with insurance, or?
No, not insurance. It's just I make films about unexplained phenomena.
Oh, right.
You see, there was a
Well, this was definitely UFOs that came and took the sheep, I think.
well, I made a film about the 1500 which went missing at Stenigott.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes, the Dennis Estates ones, yes.
Now the particular theft, if it was a theft, which this didn't appear in the newspaper, the gate was still locked with the padlock intact. There was only one gate that the sheep could have gone from. Okay. Now that looked like it could have been an insurance job, right? Because there was no evidence that any sheep had passed through that entrance, right? I spoke to the detective, and now I spoke to the sheep owner, and I also spoke to the shepherd. The shepherd was arrested with his family, and he was under suspicion for several months, but they could find no evidence against him. And I also had a witness who saw the 1,500 sheep in the field the night before. It's all in my film. I made a film in 2012 about this. Now, there have been sightings of massive UFOs in that area around that time, right? Now, the 600 which have gone near Melton Ross, again, if you look at the photographs of Jason Steeper at the gate there, there's no sheep being through that gate. There's no wool, there's nothing. Now, if you were going to steal sheep, would you steal them from military land, which is observed by the military and signposts saying that you may well get shot if you come on this land? The farmer wasn't even able to tell me what gate they'd come through or where they'd parked the wagon. I don't know what's gone on with the one at Beckenham Ranges, but I don't believe they've been rustled. I don't even I believe those existed. I believe the ones at Melton Ross may have existed and the ones at Stennicott may have existed, but you need to realise there's no evidence in any of these cases of rustling. It said in one of the articles that there was a sheepdog. I've rang the police and they've told me there was no sheepdog, or there's no evidence of a sheepdog. They've assumed there's a sheepdog. None of these cases there's evidence of tyre tracks, wool or droppings on the ground. I mean, you need to erect a pen in the field to pen them first, and then you need to build a track up onto the wagon. In all of these cases you would need more than one wagon. The Stennicott one, you would need 5 wagons.
Yes, I know. This was the thing at the time, that we couldn't work out how
right.
to did it. And with the Brand Bruton one, we can't work out.
Now, I interviewed the couple who live right next to the field at Stennicott, and they've got a dog which barks at anyone, right? And they were only 80 yards away from that field, and they didn't hear a peep during the night. So people need to stop reporting these things as rustling, because it's not rustling. The reason why it's not rustling is because there is no evidence of rustling. What evidence do you know of that any of these cases are rustling?
Well, we don't. This is why they're so mysterious, isn't it?
Right, so why do you say in your article the culprits behind this must have been, hang on, the culprits behind this must have been very organised and know how to handle sheep and dogs. So it could suggest that they have been in the business. Now, that statement that you've made there is based on no evidence at all. Would you agree with that?
Exactly, of course it is.
So why are you saying it?
Left from out, because I was presented with a story from the paper on which to give a comment, having the background in farming that I do.
So why are you assuming that there must be culprits?
Because there is no other logical explanation.
Yeah, but why assume that then if there's no other logical explanation?
Because that's the only explanation.
No, it's not. No, it's not. You go on the evidence. Why don't you just state what the evidence is? Why don't you just say, well, the animals aren't there. There's no evidence.
Really out of my ken. All I was asked to do was to provide a statement to the newspaper. All I said was that, in my opinion, it was a very organised theft. When the police were investigating him, I couldn't say anything.
Well, I suggest you go and speak to the local farmers there, because they will tell you one of them.
It's my job to do that. My job is to represent the farming industry to the press, and that's what I did. So I'm very grateful for your call, but I'm going to end it now. Okay?
All
Bye
right.
for now.
Bye-bye now.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish by saying what I said at the start. If you accept information without evidence, expect shit. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, following on from this lecture, I need to make several points. The first is that I am not accusing any individual of any crime. If crimes have been committed, then that's up to the police to find evidence and pursue that. What I am saying is that having investigated these 3 cases of extremely large numbers of sheep going missing, I could not find any evidence of large-scale sheep rustling. I suspect there has been no large-scale sheep rustling. But what I do believe, and this is a belief, it's not been expressed as a fact, I believe or I suspect that the 3 cases have involved either fraud or small numbers of sheep being taken over a longer period of time. But as I say, that's been expressed as a belief, not as a fact, and I'm not making any accusations. Now then, so to summarise then, I now do not believe at this point in time, with the evidence that I've seen, that the mass sheep disappearances in Lincolnshire are linked to the high level of UFO activity. Repeat, I don't think they're linked. I think it's a coincidence, having done much more investigating this summer. So let's go back to the UFO activity, and I want to go back to the Connors Home incident, which took place in January 2009. This was the wind turbine. Many witnesses saw an object over the wind turbine, and the following day the turbine, one of the turbine blades was missing. I assert or believe that that blade was never ever found, and another blade was bent and damaged. A few years after this incident, I had a witness report to me something that he saw in broad daylight. This was a massive egg-shaped metallic-looking UFO. It hovered above his car and then it suddenly disappeared at phenomenal speed. But the interesting thing about it was that he said he could taste electric in his mouth. It was as if he'd put his tongue on a battery. He could sense electric in the air, and that is the presence of ozone, which is given off when we have electric discharge. Now, in order to demonstrate what I think witnesses saw when they were describing tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground, I decided to do a reconstruction. I'm in the RichPlanet studio and I'm just demonstrating this mock-up that I've built, which shows what happens when a highly charged object comes down to the ground. So what we have here is a Tesla coil with two terminals. To one terminal I've attached a coat hanger and a piece of wire connected to a sphere which is wrapped in aluminium foil. The other terminal of the Tesla coil is attached to a flat plate which is also coated in aluminium foil. So what this is going to demonstrate is what happens when something which is highly charged comes down to the ground and we get electric discharge. And this, I suspect, is what was happening at the Lincolnshire UFO incident at the wind turbine, because witnesses described tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground. So in this particular mock-up, we've got over 30,000 volts being generated between the ball and the plate. So let's just demonstrate that and take a look. I can smell the ozone here now. I can smell electric. As the chap said in the clip, he could taste electric in his mouth, and after that amount of discharge, there's quite a bit of ozone that I can smell. I can sense it. We get these very interesting coronal discharges, which would look to an observer like tentacle-shaped lights coming down to the ground. Let's be clear here. I'm not saying that the damage to the turbine was caused by electric discharges from the craft. No. What I'm saying is that this craft may have been using an electro gravitic propulsion system, and for some reason was either damaged, or it had been brought down, or there was a navigation issue and brought the craft too low to the ground. Once that happened, two things occurred. Firstly, people witnessed electric discharges coming down to the ground, and secondly, we had the blade come off the turbine and one of them damaged. So I suspect that this craft impacted on the wind turbine, causing the damage, and I suspect because it was so close to the ground, this is when people witnessed the electric discharges. These two pieces of evidence suggest to me that this craft wasn't supposed to be that close to the ground. Let's now go back and have a look at what the Sky News reporter said.
Lights appeared first of all, and it wasn't, according to various locals who speak to, it wasn't just one kind of light. There were lots of different lights. There was a small light, says a county councillor. No, says another motorist. It was a massive light with tentacles hanging down.
So you can see he's trying to belittle the witnesses by saying that they couldn't agree on what they saw. But to me, it all makes sense, because the witness who just saw a light was probably seeing the object at a higher altitude, whereas the witness who saw tentacle lights coming down to the ground probably witnessed the object at a low altitude, hence it was causing electric discharge. But this again demonstrates the mainstream media's absolute lack of motivation to find the truth. I would argue that media teams were sent to this incident very quickly in order to make sure the story would be reported as some sort of mystery, which could never be solved and make people lose interest in any sort of objective explanation. In my opinion, the following is fairly clear. A very large, undisclosed craft which uses an Electro Gravitic propulsion system was being flown over the sparsely populated coastal area of Lincolnshire. This is what the evidence points to. The only questions which remain in my mind are: who were the pilots, or who was controlling it, who built it, and where is it based? Whether the craft was a human craft or even a non-human craft, I'm certain that the higher echelons of the military know about it. How would they know about it, Richard? Well, at this point, it is worth pointing out that if we go 17 miles west of the wind turbine, we come to the highest point in Lincolnshire, known as Normanby Hill. At this location, we find a covert radar system which has oversight of the entire area. The reason why it's covert is because it's inside a golf ball, so that people cannot tell which way the dish is pointed. This system would undoubtedly have picked up the object and is undoubtedly connected to GCHQ and probably other US intelligence networks. Believe me, they know what is going on. I don't know who these secret craft belong to that are being flown over northeast Lincolnshire without the public's permission. But isn't it an absolute disgrace that the powers that be work so hard to keep the information from the public? Remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
Neither of us heard anything.
Okay.
My dog would have heard something, I would have thought, if they'd been in the proximity of the house.
Now there are rumours that the shepherd and his wife were implicated, and that they were arrested, perhaps for taking money from the people who turned up with these wagons.
Yes, that's what we'd heard.
That's what you'd heard.
He took a backhander because he was involved.
Now this is rumour, isn't it? You were telling me that this, you've not heard this, because I haven't seen that in the newspapers.
No.
You said you think you might be inside now.
Well, that's what I'd heard, but you know what people are like, he's locked up now and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
All I can assume was it was done in the early hours of the morning, in the dark, and how they did it. Without being seen or heard.
Because that's the other question. They would have had to have sheepdogs, 1,500 sheep, rounding them up. They just give the sheepdogs night vision goggles, perhaps. Here, where feasibly a lorry could have come in. These green here are gates. There's a gate there, there's a gate there. But this is just fields here. So there's no roads here. So the only feasible point where sheep could have been taken is a gate here. All right. Now, the only house anywhere near the field was a house about 80 yards away, where a couple were asleep in their bed, but they had a very alert dog, and you can actually hear it barking in the background. So I went to speak to that couple to find out if they'd actually heard anything. This is Patrick and Gabriella, and just standing in front of their house here. And if I just come out of the house, the field starts just on that corner, because there's a fence going across from there, right? So as you've gone around that corner to the left is where, at that point.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Now, on that particular night when these sheep disappeared, Did you hear anything?
No, we didn't hear a thing, did we?
No.
And I can hear the dog barking there now.
Yes.
So.
I'm a fairly heavy sleeper. My wife can be light sleeping. But not
100 sheep from a single field in a single night. This was the UK's biggest ever sheep rustling incident. In 2015, 2 further farms in Lincolnshire suffered similar, preposterously large numbers of sheep going missing in a single night. Currently, the 3 cases are all unsolved. That's an alleged total of 2,400 sheep gone missing without a trace. Now let's plot some of this evidence on a chart of a map. We've got Mablethorpe here on the east coast, multiple sightings there. We've got the wind turbine incident at North Somercourts. We've got multiple sightings at Louth. We've got our large egg-shaped object here that the gentleman saw in broad daylight. We've got the triangle sightings down here. Now I'm going to show you where these 1,500 sheep disappeared from on the map. So it's right there. This is where the field is, where the 1,500 sheep disappeared. So you can see why I'm getting all excited about this. Now this is the article on the BBC website, and there's an actual interview. You can listen to it if you want. It's in my film, with the detective who's investigating this. And he says things like, well, they must have had at least 2 wagons. They've obviously very organised. They must have had dogs. Don't buy meat from dodgy shops and this kind of thing. So he's absolutely buying the fact that it's this massive rustling incident. 1,500 have gone overnight in big transporter trucks. So I went to investigate the case. This is the village where it supposedly happened, a place called Donington, very sparsely populated. Going into the local shop was like a scene from the League of Gentlemen. I said to the woman, do you know anything about these missing sheep? And she didn't actually say anything. She just sort of walked backwards back into the shop like this. All right. I got a bit more luck in the pub though. The best intelligence gathering establishments in the world, public houses. Right, so anyway, I managed to find the field. So here's Donington, the village, and now this is the field here. It's a very big field. Here's some photographs that I took of it. Nothing spectacular. This is looking from the other side. It had an electric fence on one side, and a road on the other side, and fields on the other 2 sides. So I'll show you an aerial view. So we've got the electric fence going right the way along here, a country road going along. Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Today's show is a continuation of the lecture featured on last week's show. I'll give a quick summary just in case you missed it. I reported on the very high occurrence of UFO sightings in northeast Lincolnshire, which is a sparsely populated coastal region of the UK. One of the objects witnessed in broad daylight in September 2011 was reported as being the size of 10 double-decker buses, egg-shaped, electrically charged and accelerated at impossible speed. Within a few weeks of this object being sighted, a local farm suffered an alleged theft of 1,500